This is an interview for the British Chinese Food Culture Project. The date is the 3rd of May 2011 and the time is 15:40 at the Ming-I Institute, postcode N11. The interview's name is Chi Ho Lee, and if I could get the interviewee to state and spell her full name.
It's Ruth Chan. That's Ruthchan.
Okay, sure. Okay. First of all, I'd just like to talk about your personal background, and if you could first tell me where your parents are from.
My parents are from China and Hong Kong.
Okay. And when did you help with their Chinese takeaway?
My parents ran a takeaway in the late 60s, 70s. So I was kind of born into the industry.
Oh, okay, I see. And how old were you when you started helping in their shop?
Apparently I was a prop, like all of our siblings were all props in the shop because my parents had to work as well as look after us.
Okay.
So we've been in the shop since, since we were babies, but I probably started working there when I was about, 9 or 10.
Okay. So how many years was that in total?
Until I left home, which was probably about 8 to 10 years, I would say. So, but it was just helping bits and bobs. I wasn't actually there as a full-time worker.
And what kinds of things did you do in their shop?
For me, I was too small to do the main cooking, which is like lifting the wok up, which is what my dad did. But so I helped out with taking orders, helping out with the preparation of some of the food. So we used to come in on a Saturday afternoon and help out with that, but also be serving customers. And because I was born in the UK, my English is a bit better, so I used to take orders, telephone orders from people. So that was the main thing, but I also did all the, horrible frying stuff. The deep frying stuff, which makes you smell and very greasy when you're a child. That matters.
Sounds like a very active life since you were young.
It was quite active, yeah. I think the problem was, me and my brothers used to fight a lot in the kitchen as well. So we used to have all these arguments. And you can imagine what Chinese families are like. So stop that.
Well, moving on to actually working in the takeaway. What types of dishes were cooked for customers in your parents' shop?
Well, at the time, we were the first Chinese takeaway in that particular town or village. It was a village where we lived.
Where was that?
That was in Warwickshire. So my parents served pretty much stuff that was what English people thought Chinese food was. So it was a lot of deep fried sweet and sour balls. Chow mein, chop suey was the other main one. And it didn't really go much further than that, but obviously that changed as generations went on, the decades, shall we say.
And of course, at the time, there weren't too many Chinese people around that area.
No, we were the only Chinese family at the time.
Okay.
So.
So have there been any changes through these years when they cook the same dishes over time?
They had a few, I wouldn't quite say signature dish, because that's actually making a dish up that becomes famous, but actually they had like their curry sauce was, legendary, so people used to come around especially to have, chips and curry sauce. So those are really popular. Sweet and sour is very popular, just what today you still think are popular. Cantonese takeaway food. They were still really popular, but they just added newer dishes. So they had Hong Kong style sweet and sour, and also they started doing sort of satay sauce and Szechuan dishes as well.
Okay. So the actual menu and the recipes for them have more or less stayed the same over the years, or have they changed?
It has, pretty much stayed the same, I'd say. Just expanded.
Okay.
So what started off as quite, 50 dish menu, became, 150 over the years, just adding more different types of veg. So people got more aware of, shall we say, diet, health.
Okay.
So people insisted on having chicken breasts with their curry instead of just chicken.
Sure.
So obviously that became sort of very costly.
Okay.
I was trying to get more breasts, so you used to have to charge a little bit more for things like that.
So menus and recipes, you would say that they changed according to the demands?
Yeah,
at the
a
time?
little
Okay.
bit, yeah, I would say. But it was still pretty much, because it was a small town, a village, that people kind of, it's the same people, it's like a habit for them.
Sure.
So every Friday night they come in and have a takeaway. So they enjoyed what's familiar with them. And at the time they thought that was, what Chinese food is. But as the decades have gone on, the younger generation became a bit more adventurous of food due to media and promotion of Chinese food as well as Indian cuisine at the time. So we also competed against with Indian cuisine sort of restaurants.
And in comparison to what your parents made for their business, what kind of foods did your parents prepare for the family?
Completely different. They like to have something more healthy for the family. So it was all more traditional styles. So sort of Chinese soups, which nobody would ever have. Like from a takeaway, we did provide soup, but that's a very different type of, shall we say, different type of Chinese soup. Where you have the chicken and sweet corn soup, which isn't really Chinese cooking at all. It's just kind of what Westerners think or demanded at the time. So for us it was a lot more green veg, a lot more traditional Chinese veg that we never sold at the shop. So we don't, at the time they never sold toy sum or pak choy. They did sell bean sprouts, but that was about as Chinese as vegetables got in the takeaway, because I just think people weren't familiar with that kind of.
So would you say that? With food that was made for the business, it was more kind of catering for maybe what the customer's image of what Chinese food was, and then you had your own take.
Well, it wasn't even our own take; it was just what they ate.
Sure.
When they were in Hong Kong and China, what my grandfather used to cook for us, every Christmas or what it was. So.
And were there any particular strong memories or any kind of things about your time in your parents' business that kind of was particularly pertinent? But, well, of course.
Can't think at the moment.
Of course.
Because I know my dad's particular moments, which was when the Queen Mother came to town and got this big photo of the Queen. His mother driving past the shop in a car. The other one was when we had a fireman who crashed into the shop with a car, and he was on emergency call. So it was, that was the kind of stuff he remembered, but I was too young to remember that at the time.
Sure.
But I think what's more distinct is just the kind of strange family relationship that you have compared to, should we say, like I was completely surrounded by white people in my childhood. So how their relationship with their parents were to mine when my parents were working, and then you kind of had to help work with them, and that's always gonna, probably cause some problems in that sense. My dad's always having to go at me, telling me to do this faster, to try and serve orders faster, prepare your food faster. He wants really efficient people, but obviously, we were around to help because we were, free child labour, shall we say, at the time. So you had to make do of us.
So that's given you quite a strong work ethic from a young age.
Well, they used to I'm trying to remember what it is in English, but my parents used to threaten us, if we didn't have a good work ethic, didn't go to school and get a good education, that they would give us their takeaway to take on afterwards. And because we all hated working there, that we're just like, okay, we'll go to school. We'll try and get to university or something. So, a good deterrent, shall we say? Because it's really hard work. I mean, my parents, they did a really good job. It was really, really hard work, and a lot of people go, oh, you know, your parents aren't poor, and it's like, well, that's because they had to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week at least. So yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, good qualities they've passed on, shall we say, or at least influenced us.
And how do you feel about this particular experience of working a Chinese takeaway in terms of maybe your own personal work ethic, more specifically, made you more studious when you were studying, and when
well, obviously I didn't want to fail, because I could have ended up working in a takeaway for the rest of my life, and that was my idea of a nightmare. So so we did study hard, but I think for me, because I'm a musician as well, I guess I'm quite used to putting a lot of hours of my own work, and you only sort of make what you you only get what you make of life and with work. So if you don't put the effort in, you don't get the results. So I think that's you know, that's what my parents are kind of indirectly taught us with their business.
And what do you think of your parents and your relatives' occupational choices working in the Chinese?
I think they didn't really have a choice. So my
circumstances of the time.
Yeah, there were. My dad couldn't speak very much English at all. My mum came to the UK when she was young, but still at high school, so she could never. Like, she was going to be a secretary, but she couldn't do that because she didn't get her O-level English, even though she tried many times, because, you know, she came to England a bit too late. So they just ended up kind of that, what do you do if you don't really know much English and you're Chinese? You know, most of them will end up working at some kind of catering business.
Sure.
I think that's still true today in some ways. You know, you see a lot of students in the cities in particular still working at these Chinese restaurants, you know, just taking orders, but, you know, a lot of them are just work part-time while they're studying. That's the impression I get. So they kind of are Hong Kong born, but the same. Okay. So their English is improving, so they can hear when you're trying to order, but at the same time, they're I think it's just the same as it was 30 years ago in that sense. Sure. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing your personal experiences and thoughts about your parents and their business. Next, I'd like to just talk a bit about your personal experiences of Chinese food in the UK and elsewhere. And right. And first of all, what is your favourite and least favourite Chinese dish, and why?
Okay. Are you talking about traditional or what my parents used to cook?
Whichever you prefer.
Hard to say. I don't have like one particular dish. I always have lots. That's the thing. I'll go for moods with dish. Like, I eat all kinds of cuisines. I think I'm far more adventurous than my parents when it comes to eating. So they would eat things like, they would never try sushi because it's raw, and that seems really unhygienic for them. But for me, I would quite happily eat sushi. But I think with Chinese foods, I used to really enjoy my mum's traditional soups. The pork soups, you know, the ones that boiled for 3 or 4 hours. Sure. That everyone in Hong Kong still has. But for some reason, I'm the only one between me and my siblings that actually liked it. For some reason, both my other siblings really, really hated it. So they tried to get away from that. So, and for me, I'll quite happily eat anything with bones as well. So, but both my siblings didn't want to do that. But I don't know. Okay.
And what was your least favourite Chinese dish?
I don't know. I'm not a fan.
Something with no bones?
Sorry?
Something with no bones?
No, not quite. I can eat stuff without bones as well.
Of course.
But I don't know what it's called fu yi in Chinese.
Oh, okay.
Which I really detest. I think it's called Chinese cheese in English.
Oh,
so
okay.
For some reason, I really hate that, but my dad really loves that.
Oh, okay.
So
So, so do you prefer the things that your parents make, or do you prefer the way that they're maybe made in restaurants? And of course, maybe there's some kind of difference between the way that they're made. Or
Well, I actually like how my parents cooked at home. I think it's a lot healthier. I think people got this strange perception that Chinese food is actually really healthy, but they're not when it comes from takeaways usually, because they have a lot of MSG, a lot of salt, a lot of flavouring, and a lot of sauce thickeners as well. And people just assume that. I presume it's similar to what people think of Indian cuisine. It's very, it's healthy, but that's only if you eat from home.
Okay.
So my parents don't add any MSG. They don't add any colouring. They don't. So I prefer it's more cleaner taste.
Okay.
It's more clean taste.
Okay.
But restaurants, a bit up and down, I would say.
Okay.
They're not. I don't think. I shouldn't really say this, but I don't think they're particularly great in the UK. Chinese restaurants, because they adapt it, they've westernised it so much.
And what is your experience of Chinese food outside of the UK? Maybe.
Well, I prefer Chinese food in Hong Kong, of course. I've had it in Canada as well, and that's great. And I think the big difference I find with Chinese food and culture from places like North America and Asia is they eat a lot of stuff from live. They get everything really fresh from tanks and stuff. In Vancouver, you can get supermarkets that just, Chinese supermarket just has so many tanks of fresh lobster, fresh prawns. They're still alive. So when you get home, they're really fresh. Where in this country, everybody eats that kind of stuff from frozen.
Oh, okay.
So, or not so fresh, shall we say?
Sure.
It's difficult to get fresh and a reasonable price, where I find in Asia and America it's very cheap. So people can eat properly for very cheap. So people do.
Okay. And do you prefer the Chinese food in the UK or elsewhere? Maybe comparing Canada with the UK.
I do think in the UK they don't spend quite as much time making it from fresh. Like there obviously are restaurants that do. But I don't know what it is. It doesn't taste quite the same.
Okay.
So, but like an example is the Chinese bakeries, where I find it very hard to get a really good Chinese pineapple bun or something, or an egg tart. Where obviously in Hong Kong they're just there everywhere, and they're all very cheap and far better. So it's just little things like that. I think make a lot of difference.
Okay. Well, I guess it's to do with things like such as accessibility.
Exactly. I'm thinking because UK is actually, despite the density of the population, it's still relatively small in a Chinese community, which I think is why we're so limited in choice.
And do you cook much for yourself?
I try to. I live in London, so it's a bit costly. So
Sure.
I try to cook my own food when I can, and when I have time. So,
With a Chinese influence, or?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, for me, obviously, the influence from my parents helps a lot. So that I can cook Chinese food, but a lot of it is easy Chinese food. So things like soup noodles, stir fries, where it doesn't take very long to prepare and make. But the more traditional dishes, I'd say those try those out in special occasions, shall we say?
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing your experience of Chinese food in the UK and elsewhere. And next, I'd like to move on to maybe your personal view and review of British Chinese food. Compared to the time when you were a child, do you feel the British Chinese food has changed?
I think so, but I come from quite a rural area, so I don't know how it was like in London when I was young, because I never went to London very much. I was quite close to Birmingham, but the food there was very limited at the time, so it has improved, and I'm sure, as I was saying earlier, that a lot of Westerners are much more aware of what they can eat with Chinese food, where when I was young it was just sweet and sour chicken and chips and sauce or something, or curry this, curry that. So, and they are more aware of different vegetables. You can get pak choi in supermarkets where you couldn't in the 80s. Mixed vegetables and takeaways, it might have changed now, but most takeaways when I was young, mixed vegetables was using English vegetables. So it'd be, stuff that was regularly sold in the UK, such as, broccoli, carrots.
So of course the variety has
I think
increased.
it has changed, and bamboo shoots were a novelty at that time, so they were like, oh, what's this? But now, like, everybody seems to be kind of aware what comes into a Chinese dish, shall we say. So we hope.
And how do you feel about these changes? Do you reckon it's been for the better, or?
I think so. I think people are trying to be more adventurous now, and it's not just Chinese cuisine. I think it used to be like people think, oh, East Asian food is just Chinese food, well now, actually, East Asian food is Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Thai, Malaysian, and Singaporean. So I think for people, I don't think the food has changed too much. It's much more that people are more adventurous and willing to try new things. So they're looking outside the cuisine of Chinese food.
Okay. And how popular do you feel that Chinese food was amongst the British people when you helped at your parents' shop, and maybe compared to now?
It was very popular, I think. I mean, what's difficult to try and calculate at this time is saying, okay, like, our takeaway did very well, but then it was the only takeaway in the village I lived in, so like if they wanted something that was a bit different to pizza and Indian curry, that's where I would go for. So I do think it has improved in popularity. So like my dad also worked in a restaurant before he ran a takeaway, and he said that restaurant was very popular in Stratford, but it was the only one. So I would say not quite so popular, but the businesses did really well because there was few and far of them in between. So.
And do you feel that this might also be reflected by their availability in supermarkets as well? I guess maybe you have more kind of world foods. If you.
Yeah, I think it's definitely changing. I think a lot of the more exotic vegetables are now being grown in Europe. So you don't have to just import them from China. So I think pak choi and choy sums are now being grown, I think somewhere in Spain. I'm not quite sure about that. You have to verify that. I don't know. But I think a lot of them are actually being sort of grown in the UK and in Europe. So that makes a big difference in the availability, at least with people wanting to cook it at home.
Okay. And what do you think about some of the ingredients such as MSG?
I think people over-exaggerate that MSG is like this horrible, evil ingredient, but actually, I can't remember where it's from, but it's actually quite a natural ingredient. It's just the fact that they put a lot of it with westernised takeaway food that nobody uses anywhere near as much when it comes to their own particular, when they cook at home, or probably in restaurants in Hong Kong, some of them anyway. So for me, I just think it's just been badly portrayed in the media, but they do put too much in it. That's because the demand's there, because if it's not there, just like certain food colouring, they'll be like, why does the food look like that? Why doesn't it taste like what I think it should taste, which is extremely salty? So that's the way it goes.
And how do you feel about the label British Chinese food? Do you feel it has any validity?
I don't think it really exists in this country. I mean, I'm sure it's there, like as in what British people think of Chinese food. But I do think a lot of British people still think that is Chinese food. They don't think of it as their own version of Chinese food.
Okay.
So I've never really heard of that term. Like, like people just go, "Oh, do you fancy a Chinese takeout?" They don't go, "Oh, do you fancy a British Chinese takeout tonight?" You know?
Oh,
So,
okay.
so for me, I still think like a lot of Westerners still confused of what Chinese food is to actually Chinese food that's catered for Westerners in this country.
Okay. So you feel that in the eyes of the British public, non-Chinese British public, they still see Chinese food as Chinese. They don't necessarily.
No, I mean it depends where they're from. So obviously, if you're from London, there's much higher chance, or Manchester, much higher chance that you would explore what real Chinese food is. But if you come from somewhere quite rural, where the only Chinese food is still a Chinese takeaway and a local Cantonese restaurant down the road, they probably won't be aware of it. So it's all to do with education and some points of view, ignorance as well.
How about with maybe certain dishes that were considered to be of Chinese origin, but in actual fact they were invented by the British, or maybe invented by Chinese people specifically to cater for the wider British audience? Do you feel that maybe that is classed as British Chinese food, or do you still see that still more or less very Chinese and it's very distinct? For example, chop suey.
Yeah. Oh crikey, yeah. That's not one of my favourite dishes. So.
Or maybe the curry and chips.
Oh yeah, well I think that's like, I wouldn't even call that Chinese. I just call it, I don't know, just quite generic.
Not even British Chinese or.
Well,
just
I mean,
British
obviously Chinese curries have a particular kind of taste, but every Chinese takeaway bean to their curries tend to be, they don't taste the same. So it's not this kind of like the curries all taste the same.
Okay.
They all do it from their own particular recipe. I think most of them do it from scratch.
Okay. So in your view, you feel that Chinese people view Chinese foods in this country still very much Chinese, and British people, the wider British audience that is non-Chinese, also see Chinese food as Chinese. They don't necessarily see any kind of
distinction.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I think. But I guess if you're like second generation Chinese like me, then I would still class it as. I don't really think, oh, that's fake Chinese.
Well.
Or I don't think of it's British Chinese. I think it was just fake Chinese food. Sorry, that's what I meant. And so, but you still eat it,
Sure. Okay. Next, I'd like to get your views on the outlook of Chinese catering in the UK, and I'd like to find out, in your opinion, what is the prospect of Chinese food in the UK?
Oh, I'm hoping, or I wouldn't say predict, but my feeling is in the next 5-10 years it's going to become more fusion-wise. You still get people that will be, stuck to traditional cuisine, and I'll probably prefer that type of cuisine, but you've got all these. We're hoping it will be a bit more, what's the word? Catered for much higher class in food. Like getting Michelin stars. And you've got Hakkasan, which is, at the moment it is just Chinese food, which happens to charge a lot. I'm hoping it would actually be something a bit more adventurous with Chinese food.
So you see more maybe high cuisine?
I'm hoping so. I mean, they already started trying to do that with dim sum, and at the moment there's also like places like Ping Pong, which is like a chain of dim sum bars. So they're doing something that Chinese people will never associate with dim sum, which is having it in the evening with alcohol.
Okay.
So that's, as you might be aware, is a very traditional sort of Hong Kong thing to do, like to have it as breakfast or lunch, but you don't really have it as dinner. You want something a bit heavier. So that's a new thing that's happening, and I'm sure there'll be like people looking for, little niche in the market that hasn't been done before and trying to experiment with that. But at the same time, I think people are looking elsewhere, not just Chinese food. They really are, like, people are trying to look for more authentic Thai food, for instance. In North America, in Canada, there seems to be a high rate of Vietnamese food, which there is some in this country, but it's not big. It's not mainstream food at the moment, but I'm sure that would change as well. So I think there'd be lots of little pockets of East Asian kind of cultures that would come out in the next decade. But, I'm hoping people don't just have Chinese food because it's the cheapest thing to have when they go out beside McDonald's, which seems to be what people do in London at the moment. So Chinatown has been kind of, I think, almost marketed to be a bit downtrodden, you know what I mean? A bit poor man's food.
Sure.
Well, obviously, there's lots of great Chinese food that should be in the high end of the sort of food cuisine, getting Michelin stars and stuff, that people don't consider it because it's Chinese. So I'm hoping that will change. So.
It's interesting that you mentioned the word fusion. I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that. Would you see that as maybe combining maybe elements of British cuisine with elements of Chinese cuisine?
I think so, yeah, possibly. I don't mean, when a fusion, I don't mean British Chinese at all.
Okay.
Yeah. I think fusion is an English take. There's already food programs on TV that you see young chefs already trying to do, which is dim sum ball or some kind of a wonton that instead of making it out of pork and prawns, it'd be making out of something completely different, duck and stuff. So people already are experimenting, trying to use more. I think what's going to happen is they're going to have more English ingredients put into Chinese food.
Okay. So you feel that the idea of fusion is just like a separate term to anything to be related to identity with British Chinese food?
I think fusion is kind of more not British against Chinese. It's more, I don't know, European against East Asia. That's what I kind of think fusion food is becoming.
So it's a more wider interpretation.
I think so, because I think a lot of people love French cuisine, and there are chefs out there who are combining,
very broad elements of cooking together.
Exactly, and then there'll be lots of Japanese food that's been used into French cuisine, believe it or not. So, because of the sort of the raw texture and stuff, it's no different to a steak tartare. So it's that kind of thing. I think that's gonna, they'll probably have I'm sure there's a tuna tartare out there already or something that's similar, and that's I call that sort of getting close to fusion food.
Okay. So. And where did your parents buy their ingredients?
Well, my parents ran a takeaway in the Midlands, so they used to go to Birmingham, which is the biggest city, closest city in the Midlands for them to get to, which actually sold Chinese ingredients. So my parents used to go to a few wholesalers, Wing Yip being one of the main ones, and there was a couple others, but I think Wing Yip is the most memorable one because everyone knows that it's grown to being huge now and have several branches of their shop. But my parents used to shop there when I think it must have been in the 70s, when they were still relatively small. It wasn't even a shop, it was just like a building, a small building, and my mum used to tell me that she remembers the wife, I can't remember her name, the wife that used to carry the baby while packing bean sprouts into the bag, ready to sell. So it's like little things like that, and it was just as limited in Birmingham, I think, in ethnic minorities with Chinese people, so it was still a very small community, and they were doing very basic, they obviously worked from nothing, so they've done really well out of that. So it was literally a small Chinese wholesaler shop that somehow expanded, and there was a few places that my parents used to get meat from, but obviously where you can get vegetables for yourself as well. So coming from a rural area, there is no such thing as choice some at that time. So they still had to get that all from Wing Yip as well. So.
You mentioned that you having lived in a rural area where there weren't too many Chinese people.
Yeah.
What was the relationship like with other Chinese people, I guess maybe taking as an example, the owner of Wing It, I guess you were able to strike quite a strong relationship because there weren't so many Chinese people. So
Well, I think in rural areas it was definitely like every takeaway owner within 20, 30 miles, people kind of knew at least by name, should we say. I think it's not quite so much the case in Birmingham. So my parents did kind of know Wing It, but I don't think they were, best buddies or anything. It was just like, for them, my dad was just a client, a customer, just like everyone else. But, obviously being in a Chinese community, they would chat just like they would chat with any restaurant owner in Birmingham, which they used to go to all the time. So that was our main Chinese food, real Chinese food intake, was actually going to Birmingham and going to a Birmingham Chinese restaurant that was actually more catered for Chinese people. So those are pretty, small. It was all kind of in one area. But so obviously that's changed over the years. But so I would say, like, for me as a second generation person, all the Chinese people I met were, my parents' friends' children as well. So that was always awkward, and you know how like certain Asian families like to embarrass people, like trying to set them up with other people's kids. Okay, you will marry this Chinese person, also, like, so, and they're always trying to encourage friends, daughters and sons to get together with you, but I think it was all a bit too far wide apart. I think coming from a rural area.
And how do you feel the food industry is like for the subsequent generations? So I guess, for example, if you had continued your family's business, maybe how would your own work ethic be different to theirs? Maybe.
Probably. I can't imagine running a restaurant. There's one thing cooking at home, and there's another thing actually doing it as work and as a business. Okay. So I actually quite enjoy cooking like Chinese food for, I wouldn't say just non-Chinese people, obviously them as well, but for Westerns, because for them it's like a new experience for some. So that's quite nice, but to actually work in a restaurant, I think I would try and do less hours. Would be the thing, but obviously if you care that much about your business, you shouldn't be doing less hours, so obviously it wasn't meant to be for me.
Okay. I guess for your parents it was kind of more necessity, having been...
Yeah, and at the time, everyone married quite young, their children quite young, so, my parents, they didn't just think of it as a business that they just happened to do because they know to work, but they also think they've had a family to feed, so they had to keep going. Basically, they couldn't just go, "Oh, I just have to give this up. I'm going to try doing a different degree or something." They didn't have that choice, so because they didn't have that kind of education in the UK to be able to just change career whenever they wanted to, and sort of language problem as well at the time.
So the their career choice was partially, if not mainly, dictated by the language barrier at the time, because
I think so, yeah, definitely. And as a Chinese person coming to the UK, there must have, there are some obviously who are very educated that come in, but my parents coming to the UK not being very, unfortunately, not having to be able to be educated, so they couldn't decide to be a professor, Mandarin studies or something like that. So, because they just didn't have that kind of education, and they come by, it was all circumstances. So, like, my mum came to the UK because my grandfather ended up working in the catering industry in the UK, because at the time they thought it was more money to send to their relatives in Hong Kong. They thought it was a gold mine, which is probably a bit of a lie. They realised when they came, they thought they were going to earn lots and lots of money and send it all back to their family, and it'd be worth lots of money because of the pound and everything. But then they realised actually to earn money, they had to work far harder than most people. To as like even I wouldn't say it's just Chinese takeaways. Everybody who works in catering works really hard. They have to work really unsociable hours, and that includes fish and chip shops, kebab shops, the curry takeouts, and even in like a normal sort of restaurant, you've got to work to 12 every night. So it's not a very sociable job, shall we say. So yeah, I guess as well, my parents ended up having a very isolated community because of ours are so unsociable that they couldn't really integrate that so well with other people because they were working in the evenings when, most Westerners would finish their job by 5, come out and see their children maybe go out for a pint or something, and they couldn't really do that because they were working to midnight every night. So, and they ended up getting up in the morning because they're working late, and then half the time they have to prepare the food to open in the evening anyway, so they end up working in the afternoon. So the chicken wings were cheap, which obviously not the ideal situation for not just Chinese people, but as a family as well. So, I never spent very much time, unfortunately, with my parents as much as probably I would have liked, because they were always working. So, yeah.
And in contrast with yourself, having been born and also grew up in the UK, I guess it gave you kind of more choice to kind of maybe explore other career choices instead of the food industry.
Yeah,
partly to do with your English, because
I was born in England, I was born in England. I was brought up in the UK. Most of my friends until I went to uni were white, should we say, because I come from a rural area. I kind of picked up quite a bit of Western attitudes. So, I didn't think, I can only work in a takeaway because my parents run it. I was thinking, what would I want to do? I actually thought about what I wanted to do when I was younger, just like everybody else, any other Westerner in this country. I don't think I was limited at all, and I think parents working in a takeaway actually just kind of made it crystal clear that I probably didn't want to work in that industry. So, because my parents cook, I really didn't want to cook when I was younger because I just thought it was a bit of a chore. So it's only as I got older, I actually started cooking for myself. And then found when I actually went to university, it was a really useful skill to have. To actually cook for yourself and cook pasta and sauce for yourself. Where you get some students that can't even do that. So actually, having that kind of slightly domesticated background, shall we say, actually it saved a lot of. It became a really useful skill to have. So actually cooking for yourself. So people thought some of my friends at uni thought I was what's the word, exquisite with my cooking because I don't know, I managed to put chicken with my pasta, or grilled chicken wings, just because obviously chicken wings were cheap meat to have at the time, so I just used to marinate that with, I don't know, soy sauce or something. Really, really simple stuff. Okay. Soy sauce and lemon or something, something vaguely Chinese, and it's like, oh my god, that's amazing. But, for me that was quite simple cooking, because I guess the level of cooking has kind of risen for me because of that. So what I found was quite easy. Everyone else was this day. Really, really hard.
So was your cooking quite Chinese influenced, or?
Yeah, I could tell you some stories about that. I'll tell you one story. I used to have some friends, when you're really young at primary school, and you get friends coming around occasionally, and I think my parents made this kind of Chinese normal cuisine, which consisted of, Chinese veg, some kind of pork, and then steamed whole fish, which, as you can imagine, when I was little, kids weren't used to seeing a big fish with the head on. And obviously, because I was brought up to eat like a Chinese, shall we say, or Hong Kong person, but, that didn't faze me at all, and I just ate it, including the head, and and the bones and stuff, and my friends were totally horrified. so it's just quite amusing now thinking about it, but at the time I thought it was quite normal because when you're brought up eating that kind of stuff, heads of prawns and all that things, you think it's quite normal, but you don't realise your friends actually think that's quite horrible. So.
And did the making of that Chinese food make you think a bit more about your own identity?
I think in some ways, I mean, my parents always wanted me to be quite Chinese because they're from Hong Kong, China, but, you know, I was brought up in the UK, but the main thing they're proud of me, they say, is because I eat like someone from China. So they're quite pleased that I'm quite experimental with what I eat, and yeah, every time they cook anything, I'll quite happily munch it, where my siblings were a little bit more picky. Like, my brother would not eat bones in fish. He if it's a fish, he would only want to fillet. You know, he doesn't want that trouble of having to take them out and stuff. So yeah, it's just, I think it's by chance though, and I like eating, which helps.
So eating the bones.
Well, I wouldn't say eating the bones, but you know, like kind of like you don't eat the bones.
The sight of the bones it was like a reminder of your Chinese identity.
Well, it's not really that. It's like my parents taught, like my dad was quite like teaching us since a very young age how to eat fish that still have bones though, and you had to take them out without choking yourself to death. So it's things like I'm not scared of it, shall we say. It's more than I think of it as Chinese cuisine, because you do obviously now go to restaurants of Western cuisine where you have a whole fish on the plate, and people I don't think are quite as squeamish now. It depends really. It depends on not only the generation but where they're brought up. So if you get kids, there are a lot of kids that have been brought up completely by kebabs, then obviously they're going to be horrified at something like that. But then you do get, you know, more adventurous English parents
Sure.
that would encourage their kids to, you know, find out where their food comes from, which is a new trend that's been coming up through Jamie Oliver and River Cottage and all that stuff. So I think that's quite important as well. But the main difference is I got taught that, you know, in my childhood, where it's now only the general public is beginning to be aware of where, you know, them having to really educate themselves about food, because people are scared of where it comes from now. So.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much for your participation in this project.
My pleasure.